Adrenal insufficiency turns the simple act of eating into a complex biological calculation, especially when it comes to sugar and the massive array of substitutes available today. It isn't just about weight or dental health. For those with conditions like Addison's or secondary adrenal insufficiency, how the body processes sweetness directly intersects with how it manages life sustaining hormones. We are diving deep into an article from the My Adrenal Life group that breaks down the science behind these sweeteners, and you can find the full text and community discussion over in the My Adrenal Life Facebook group. The core issue here is that cortisol is the primary regulator of blood sugar, and when your body doesn't produce enough of it, every gram of glucose or every drop of an artificial substitute carries a different metabolic weight than it does for the general population.
That metabolic weight is exactly what makes this so high stakes. When we talk about adrenal insufficiency, whether it's primary, secondary, or even steroid-induced, we're talking about a system that lacks its main thermostat for glucose. Cortisol's job is to ensure the brain and muscles have a steady supply of energy, particularly during stress or fasting. Without that natural buffer, people with AI are often more vulnerable to hypoglycemia or reactive blood sugar swings. The article points out that the goal isn't to label foods as good or bad, but to understand the mechanics. If you drink a high-sugar soda, the resulting insulin spike clears that sugar out of your blood, but without sufficient cortisol to counter-regulate and bring blood sugar back up, you can end up in a dangerous crash. This is why the search for the perfect substitute is so common in this community, yet the answer is rarely a simple swap.
The article mentions several natural sugars that often benefit from a health halo, things like honey, maple syrup, and coconut sugar. There is a perception that because these come from a plant or a hive, they are somehow gentler on the system. But when you look at the actual biochemistry, is there a meaningful difference for someone managing adrenal insufficiency?
The short answer is not really. From a blood glucose perspective, your body sees honey or maple syrup much like it sees white table sugar. While honey does contain trace antioxidants and maple syrup has some polyphenols, the amount you would have to consume to get a therapeutic dose of those nutrients would involve a massive amount of sugar. For someone with AI, the metabolic impact is the same: a rise in blood glucose and a subsequent demand for insulin. Coconut sugar is another one that gets marketed as lower glycemic, but the difference is marginal. In realistic serving sizes, it still behaves like sugar. The article is very clear that less processed may be better for overall food quality, but it definitely does not mean blood sugar neutral.
What about agave? It has been the darling of the health food world for years because it doesn't spike blood sugar the way other syrups do. If the goal is avoiding those sharp spikes and crashes we just talked about, wouldn't agave be a logical choice for an adrenal patient?
Agave is a fascinating case of marketing meeting half-truths. It has a lower glycemic index because it is incredibly high in fructose, often higher than high fructose corn syrup. Fructose doesn't raise blood glucose immediately because it has to be processed by the liver first. But research, including studies published in journals like Frontiers in Pharmacology, shows that excess fructose intake is linked to de novo lipogenesis. That means the liver converts that fructose into fat, which can lead to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and insulin resistance over time. So while it might prevent an immediate sugar crash today, it could be setting the stage for metabolic complications tomorrow. For someone already managing a complex endocrine disorder, adding liver stress or insulin resistance to the mix is a significant concern.
If the natural sugars are still problematic, it's no wonder people turn to artificial sweeteners like aspartame, saccharin, or sucralose. These are calorie-free and don't raise blood sugar directly, which seems like a win. However, the article suggests these aren't exactly inert substances. What is the current research saying about how these chemicals interact with our internal systems?
This is where the science gets really nuanced. For a long time, the only concern with things like saccharin was the old, now debunked link to bladder cancer. But today, the focus has shifted to the gut microbiome and appetite signaling. A landmark study published in the journal Nature found that some non-caloric artificial sweeteners can actually alter gut bacteria in a way that induces glucose intolerance. It's a paradox. You're taking a sugar-free sweetener to stay healthy, but it might be changing your gut flora in a way that makes your body worse at handling actual sugar. Then there's the issue of cephalic phase insulin response, where the sweet taste alone might trick the brain into preparing for a sugar load that never arrives, potentially messing with hunger hormones and reward pathways.
That seems particularly relevant for adrenal patients who struggle with fatigue. If you're using diet soda or sugar free snacks to get through a slump, but those sweeteners are potentially disrupting your gut health or your appetite signals, you might be accidentally making that fatigue harder to manage.
Exactly. And we have to look at the practical digestive side too. Many people with adrenal insufficiency already deal with nausea or digestive sensitivity as a symptom of their condition, or a side effect of their replacement meds like hydrocortisone or fludrocortisone. Artificial sweeteners like sucralose, found in Splenda, have shown mixed results in human trials regarding inflammation and gut health. If you're already in a fragile state, adding a substance that might cause bloating or alter your microbiome could exacerbate your existing symptoms. The article points out that these effects are highly individual. One person might tolerate aspartame fine, while another feels significantly worse.
We should talk about the keto friendly options because they are everywhere now. Stevia and monk fruit are often marketed as the gold standard of natural, calorie free sweetness. Are they as clean as the packaging suggests, or is there a hidden catch for the AI community?
The catch is often in the fine print of the ingredient list. Pure stevia and pure monk fruit generally have a very favorable metabolic profile. They don't seem to spike insulin or glucose for most people. However, because they are hundreds of times sweeter than sugar, manufacturers have to bulk them up with fillers so you can measure them like a teaspoon of sugar. Often, that filler is erythritol, which is a sugar alcohol, or even dextrose or maltodextrin, which are actual sugars. So you might think you're using a blood sugar neutral plant extract, but you're actually getting a dose of something else entirely. For someone with AI, that hidden maltodextrin could cause an unexpected glucose rise, or the erythritol could cause sudden digestive distress.
Let's dive into those sugar alcohols specifically. Erythritol and xylitol are the big ones right now. They've been considered safe for a long time, but the article mentions some very recent and frankly quite concerning research regarding cardiovascular health. Can you explain what the Cleveland Clinic and other researchers have found?
This is a major development in nutritional science. Recent studies, including a prominent one published in Nature Medicine in 2023, found a correlation between high levels of erythritol in the blood and an increased risk of heart attack and stroke. The researchers found that erythritol seems to make blood platelets more reactive, which could potentially increase the risk of blood clots or thrombosis. They found similar concerns with xylitol in a follow-up study. Now, it's important to be objective here. These are observational studies. They don't prove that eating erythritol causes heart attacks, especially since the body can produce some erythritol on its own. But the fact that it might influence platelet activity is enough for many experts to suggest caution, especially for people who already have cardiovascular risk factors. For the adrenal community, many of whom are on fludrocortisone or high-dose steroids, which can impact blood pressure and heart health, this is a piece of data that can't be ignored.
Beyond the heart concerns, there's the more immediate issue of the gut. Maltitol, sorbitol, xylitol, these are famous for causing what's politely called digestive upset. For most people, that's just an annoyance. But for someone with adrenal insufficiency, why is a simple case of the runs actually a medical emergency?
This is the most critical point for this specific audience. In adrenal insufficiency, any significant loss of fluids, whether through vomiting or diarrhea, can lead to a rapid depletion of electrolytes and a drop in blood pressure. Because these patients don't have the natural cortisol and often the aldosterone to help the body retain salt and water during stress, they can spiral into an adrenal crisis very quickly. An adrenal crisis is a life-threatening emergency. If a sugar-free candy containing maltitol causes severe osmotic diarrhea, that person isn't just uncomfortable, they are at risk of a medical catastrophe. This is why the article emphasizes that sugar-free does not mean risk-free. For a patient with AI, the gastrointestinal side effects of sugar alcohols are a major safety concern.
There are some newer players on the scene called rare sugars, specifically D-allulose. The article seems cautiously optimistic about these. What makes them different from an artificial sweetener or a sugar alcohol?
Rare sugars are really interesting because they are technically sugars that exist in nature, like in figs or raisins, but our bodies don't have the machinery to fully metabolize them for fuel. Allulose, for instance, has about 70% of the sweetness of table sugar, but only about 10% of the calories. Most of it is absorbed in the small intestine and then excreted in the urine without ever being converted to glucose. Early research even suggests it might have anti-inflammatory effects or help stabilize post-meal blood sugar. However, because it's still relatively new to the mass market, we don't have decades of long-term human data. And like the sugar alcohols, if you eat too much of it, it can still cause bloating or gas. It's promising, but it's not a magic bullet.
One of the most profound sections of the article deals with the psychology of sweetness. The idea that even if a sweetener is technically calorie free, it might still be keeping us stuck in a cycle of cravings. It mentions dopamine signaling and habit loops. How does that play out for someone who is already dealing with the chronic stress of a lifelong illness?
It's a very compassionate take. When you're exhausted, nauseated, or feeling the effects of under-replacement, your brain screams for energy. Often, that manifests as a craving for something sweet because sugar is the fastest fuel source for the brain. If we constantly feed that sweet preference with high-intensity sweeteners, we might be keeping those reward pathways in the brain on high alert. This can make it harder to transition to a more stable, whole food diet that would actually help manage AI symptoms better. It's not about having bad willpower, it's about how the brain responds to hyperpalatable tastes when the body is under physiological stress. The article encourages people to ask if their sweetener habit is actually supporting them or just keeping them in a cycle of fatigue and crashes.
It seems the ultimate takeaway is that there is no one size fits all answer. The article suggests reflection points rather than a list of allowed and forbidden foods. It asks things like, does this sweetener affect your blood sugar? Is it causing digestive issues? Is it a daily staple or an occasional treat?
Exactly. For a person with adrenal insufficiency, their response to a sweetener might change depending on whether they are well managed that day or if they are fighting off a cold. If you're sick, your body's demand for cortisol goes up and your blood sugar stability goes down. That might be a day where a small amount of real honey and tea is actually more helpful than a chemical sweetener that might irritate your stomach. Conversely, if you're managing weight or prediabetes alongside your AI, finding a high-quality monk fruit blend might be a great tool. It's about being a detective of your own body. You have to look at the ingredients, track your symptoms, and have those informed conversations with your endocrinologist.
The article closes by saying you don't need a perfect diet to care about your health, which feels like a much needed breath of fresh air in a world of rigid nutritional advice. Managing a condition like Addison's is already a full-time job. Adding the stress of perfect eating can sometimes do more harm than good.
That's a vital point. Stress itself raises the body's need for cortisol. If you are stressing over every gram of sugar to the point of anxiety, you are taxing the very system you're trying to protect. The goal is education, not fear. Understanding that maltitol might cause a crash or that erythritol has some new cardiovascular questions doesn't mean you can never have a sugar-free chocolate. It just means you make that choice with your eyes open, knowing how it might affect your specific physiology. It's about moving toward a pattern that makes you feel stable and energized, rather than chasing a marketing claim on a box.
The complexity of the sweetener landscape really mirrors the complexity of adrenal insufficiency itself. There are no easy shortcuts, and what works for a healthy person might be genuinely risky for someone with AI. By focusing on the data, whether it's the cardiovascular findings on xylitol or the liver impact of agave, people can move away from the good versus bad labels and toward a more functional understanding of their nutrition. If you found this breakdown helpful, consider sharing this episode with someone else navigating the complexities of adrenal health.